As part of our social blueprint series on Everybody Has a Story, I'm honoured today to have with me Leah Boulton, whose story is a really interesting story, and the whole journey of how she got where she is today is a really, really interesting story that I think everybody will really enjoy hearing about. So Leah, welcome, and thank you for joining me today.
Thank you.
So most people who Google you or do a bit of homework on you will know about your role in Pathways, but there's so much more, so we'll get to Pathways. You graduated from Scopus in
1989. I actually went to Mount Scopus until my last 2 years.
Okay.
And then I went to Carey Grammar.
Okay. And when you left school, what did you go on to study?
Okay, so when I left and finished year 12, I went to Phillip Institute, Bundoora, and did a year of sports science.
Okay.
And then ended up switching and moving to RMIT in the city and studying design and advertising.
Okay, they're miles apart. I've got to stop you there.
I could never work out which was my hobby and which was my career.
Okay.
Sport or design.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately I chose design as my area, but kept up the sport in the background.
Okay, that makes sense. So for the graduates out there who are questioning which direction to head in, there's always options available.
There are, you can change. And then when I finished my bachelor, it was called Visual Communication in Advertising, I then managed to get a scholarship and I went to Harvard University in the US for a year. And I was able to study anything from the Arts and Sciences handbook. So I did Spanish, I did sociology, I did documentary film, a whole lot of things.
And did that pique an interest in a particular area?
It was probably my first introduction to documentary film, and ever since then I've really enjoyed making short films.
Okay.
And what else did it pique in me? It just expanded my brain. I mean, I'm interested in so many different facets of life that it just contributed to the many directions I have taken my life. I've been very privileged that way.
And so you went on to work in the advertising field as an art director.
Yes.
Thinking about the advertising world and using, based on, I guess, my own imagination of what that must have been like in the mid-90s, I guess we're talking at that point. What was the industry like?
Sexist, male-dominated. I was the only woman in the creative department when I started out. Fun parties and a really great mix of neurodivergent people.
Wow, okay.
Who are all very high achieving,
yes.
And it's just a melting pot of all different types of advertising agencies. You've got the creative department that I was in, ideas-driven people, not great with discipline and time. Then you've got the account service department where we call them the suits, and they'd be keeping us in line and giving us briefs to work on. You've got production that work out, how we actually put to air the things that, how do we actually film and produce the ideas that the creative department have. So it's just a really interesting melting pot.
Yes.
I met some wonderful characters there. I've got friends from the industry still, but very few women.
So how do you go about coping in that, as a female in that environment? It takes a lot of confidence, I'd imagine, to...
I would say it took a lot of resilience.
Yeah.
I must have a thicker skin than I realised. I spent my life growing up playing competitive squash against guys and men.
They would have given you some resilience.
Yeah, it just really taught me how to understand. I mean, I was often not put on certain briefs simply because I was female. The behaviour, and I don't know what stories you want me to share because some of them are actually quite lewd.
Right.
I could write a book, but I was invited into my creative director's office when I was about 23 and asked what Monica Lewinsky did with a cigar with Bill Clinton, and that's only a Maya thing. My copywriter was very often off at the TAB putting bets on for our boss.
So do you bow down to that sort of behaviour? I mean, you can be really smart and you come back and put them back in their place, I guess, or you say, I've got to know my place as an employee here and I'm going to have to go with this. I mean, caught between a rock and a hard place.
In that time, so it was the early to mid-90s, I actually spent a lot of time going off and just sitting in my car in the middle of the day and thinking about things. My mother wanted me to document everything. I didn't. I feared.
Very advanced thinking for them.
Yes. And I didn't because I was worried. I just figured I'd never get employed again if I reported some of the things that went on. But I got through, and I think the first 5 years of working life, for anyone, male or female, you bust out of uni with all these ideas and with all this confidence, and then you get into the workplace and people don't trust you because you haven't done the hard yards, you haven't performed, they haven't seen what you can actually achieve. So I guess it was going to be difficult anyway in that very ego-driven industry. I guess during that time it had the added layer where sexism was tolerated or just not
questioned.
Exactly.
Just was, yeah.
And so I just had to play along with it. I had an interview at Saatchi with the creative director there, and his opening line to me was, and I would have been about 24, 25, and he said, "So Leah, I hear you're a bit of a femo vego leso." And I just looked at him blankly, and I was wearing a red safari suit at the time, and
Power suit.
my power suit. And I think he probably was slightly high at that interview. His following question was, "And I see here, Leah, by your birthday, July, I'm a Cancerian. I'm not sure if that's going to work for us." And I'm not into star signs, so I wasn't sure how to respond to that either. Yeah. I did end up getting the job somehow.
Wow.
There was one time when he actually spat a Hungry Jack's burger at my work when the client was waiting to be presented with that work. They were waiting in the boardroom. There were other times when he threw corn chips at the lot of us. Yeah, they're the less lewd stories I'll share with you, but that's what it was like.
So during this time, which sounds incredibly challenging in a lot of ways, was there a mentor of sorts? I mean, it's a very male-dominated world.
Great question. I had two amazing mentors. One wonderful man called Martin Carafa, who became the worldwide strategic planner of multinational agencies, and I recently acknowledged him in an article that I wrote. And then another dear man who actually passed away a year ago, Michael Goff, who just used to entertain me with his stories. And you're absolutely right, you need a mentor, male or female, anyone. When you're starting an industry, you need a mentor. And often it doesn't matter what workplace you end up in. It matters what seat you're sitting in and who is there to mentor you.
Yeah, and that relationship.
That's right. I continued on in advertising. I moved to the UK around 1998, so sort of my late 20s, and I freelanced around in all the big agencies over in the UK.
Why the move to the UK? What?
Followed a guy.
They asked.
And it didn't work out, but I had a brilliant time in the UK, and freelancing was wonderful because you have a different sense of respect. When you're a contractor in an agency, they need you there. You're not often there for long enough to become part of the politic. The gossip can wash off of you. I'm not one for gossip.
Yeah.
And it's fun seeing how long you can prolong your time there to be there as long as possible. And actually, my copywriter and I, because you work in a partnership, I had a brilliant copywriter, Kevin Pereira. We would get in there, and the first day in the first week was trying to get your name on the phone list. And once you're on the phone list, then you knew you were going to be there for a bit longer.
Yeah.
And then once you got an email address, you knew that you were there for even longer. And we would try and stick around until they'd want to start negotiating with us to stay on as long-term employees.
Nah, I'm over this.
Go through the negotiations for a little bit, and then it wasn't, and then we would move on.
How long?
I did that for 2 years.
Okay, and then decided to come back to Melbourne?
Moved back to Melbourne because it was a place where I felt I wanted to ground my life.
Okay.
Even though I was having a brilliant time in the UK.
Yeah.
So it was around 2001.
And I imagine, Australians were quite revered overseas at that time, probably more America than the UK. But was that somewhat of a selling point that you had come from Australia for those 2 years?
I think so. I think they found us hardworking.
Yeah.
Somehow entertaining, although I think the English sense of wit is one that we can never beat.
True.
That was a wonderful time for me in the ad world. I'd got through the rubbish of the culture in Melbourne when I started out.
Yeah.
I want to say that not everyone in the industry was as I described. There are some brilliant people, but in general, when I was a young, naive woman, it was quite tough. In the UK, there seemed to be much less overt sexism.
Okay.
In my experience, but it might have just been that I was older.
I was going to say you had gained some experience and worldliness by that point.
That's right.
So going back to that mentor question, has that driven you? Do you mentor others now, or do you see yourself as somewhat of a mentor? No matter what field, did that give you some motivation to be there for others, or particularly women coming through?
It's a great question. I didn't realise the value of a good mentor until I had one in my life. But it wasn't probably until a few years after I'd been mentored by them that I realised how beneficial it had been for me. I do love mentoring people. Yeah. I think it's something that comes naturally to me. And I do have a handful of people, not only women, that do call me up and bounce off me, and I welcome them to do that. I say, listen, call me whenever you need to bounce something off, and they do, and I'm really pleased about that. Yeah. And actually, I have a woman who's wonderful. We had a coffee last week, and Zita Unger, and she has been a brilliant mentor for me in my role at Pathways.
Okay, so let's jump to Pathways.
Okay.
So it was several years down the track. How does Pathways, we'll get to what exactly Pathways is and what it means today. You're still working in advertising at that point in time. How does this start? How does the seed get planted?
Okay. So I was working in big agencies and then moved out of big agency land just before, or when I was starting to think of having a family. I've got a 14-and-a-half-year-old daughter. So probably about 16 years ago, I left big ad agency world. Very difficult to have a young family in that industry, I could see. And I started my own studio, design and branding studio and advertising studio, where I ran that and still run it. Less so now, probably until about a year ago. That was my major thing.
Was that a big jump going from big advertising to your own thing? I mean, it takes a lot of courage. But...
It actually was less of a jump than it might seem, because most people who work in the creative department of advertising have other freelance little jobs going on in the background because you're made redundant so often. I was made redundant twice. You need the fallback. But also, I guess I'm always driven and inspired by new briefs.
Yeah.
I just always have clients in the background. So it got to the point where I ended up with enough work of freelance sort of smaller projects that I could take on myself. And I ended up having a couple of subcontractors that worked for me.
Okay. So that alleviates the fear of, will I get work? Because you already have the work.
Exactly.
Okay.
So I did that for a number of years, all through my daughter's sort of early years of life, up until a year ago, because it was only a year ago that I started being paid with the work that I did for Pathways.
Yeah.
It was back in 2013 when I was at an ultra-Orthodox wedding where I fully covered up my hair, everything. I looked.
So stop you for a second. So you come from a non-religious background.
Okay, yes, very much a non-religious background.
So how do you find yourself at a ultra-Orthodox wedding?
A friend that I grew up with is Balcheva and became very frum.
Okay.
And we reconnected and she invited me along.
Okay. So that was the extent of your relationship with the ultra-Orthodox community at that point?
That was it.
Okay. Okay.
I had never had an experience in that community before. I had the privilege of going to a few ultra-Orthodox simchas, and out of respect, I would fully cover up. I was told I looked like the Rebbetzin. And I really, really valued those experiences. I got to know a number of women in the community and absolutely value and respect if they're happy with their choices, then I think that's a wonderful thing. Your truth is different to my truth, which is different to somebody else's truth. And by going along to these functions and doing my best to fit in.
I was going to say, did you feel like a pretender of sorts? It's really hard. It's not just fitting in, it's a big adjustment.
I went there with curiosity and was quite open to the fact that that was not my community, and they would have known it was not my community because their community is so tight. And I would just simply ask questions. I remember the first evening I went to, I asked, because I was with the women, it was very segregated, I would ask, because I was in an engagement party, the theme was all about love and marriage, and I would ask women, you know, about their own children and how they found matches, how they found shivers for their children. It made me think that perhaps in my life I'd made things too complicated because to have your parents help set you up and the shadchan, matchmaker, to help set you up, and only after a matter of a few dates, this is it. While it's not the way that I choose to live my life and it's not my truth, I can see that for others it can work.
Did you sense from those conversations that they wholly believed in that system, that matchmaking system, and they trusted it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And so that blew me away because it was so different from my thinking and the way I'd ever been raised.
Yeah.
But through those experiences and meeting those wonderful women and seeing that many of them are happy, but I did come to realise that some aren't. And it may not be because of religious reasons or philosophical reasons. It may be simply because their workload is so tough, having so many children, but having to show a brave face on the outside. I started to sort of see the insights of how the depths of aspects of the community work. But it wasn't until one young woman confided in me.
And I was just going to ask you, was that a sixth sense of yours, or were they talking, you know, if you're talking to these women at functions, I imagine they're towing the party line to a degree.
That may be the case for some, it may well be the case for some. It's hard to say. I guess when we all go to parties, we all put on a smiley face.
True.
I don't know anyone that's gone through a life without some kind of trauma or tragedy or difficulty. We all go through chapters. And when we go to parties, we dress up and we look happy. And very often we are happy for that moment.
But often it's a total facade.
That's it. So it had never occurred to me, though, that people within insular Jewish Orthodox communities would question lifestyles, practices or beliefs. It had never occurred to me. And it was one young woman, as I was mentioning, who said to me that she wanted to go to university. And unfortunately, with her schooling, it had only taken her to year 11 and it wasn't a possibility at that point for her. Or she couldn't see how it would be possible. And we started to talk. I could sense that she had a lot of other questions going on for her as well, not just education. This was back in 2003, and I was aware of an organisation in New York City called Footsteps. And I asked her if she was open to me contacting Footsteps on her behalf.
What sort of age bracket?
She was around 20, 21, okay. Early 20s. And I asked her whether she was open to me contacting them on her behalf so she could talk to them, because I knew nothing about her community. I didn't want to lead her astray or off the derech.
Was she asking you for advice, or she just needed to talk?
She was asking me for advice and needing to talk. She also said that she didn't want to remarry because her first marriage only lasted a few months, and she was living back with her family again, and it wasn't an easy, comfortable situation for her. I didn't feel it was my role, or I didn't have the expertise to be able to mentor her when it comes to mentoring.
Yeah.
Footsteps in New York City responded by saying that at that stage they didn't have the capacity to deal with anyone outside of New York, let alone the USA.
Yeah, just like Australia, yeah.
From Australia. Right. So I just took it upon myself that I figured if there was her, there's got to be others, and she needs to be connected in. She can't do this on her own. That is a really lonely experience. We've all been through loneliness at different times in our life, whether you've been through postnatal depression, whether your parents have split up when you were a teenager. To talk to others that have got similar lived experience is comforting. And so that became my aim, of trying to find others that she could.
How do you do that? That sounds very easy in theory, but no, how?
Very difficult. Well, it started my journey in reading everything there was around about joining insular communities, leaving insular communities, the risks and the rewards of both. Because there are risks and rewards when you move away. And then what are the benefits of being in a big community, and then you lose that when you... About a year after I'd made a concerted decision that I wanted to start something like Footsteps in Melbourne locally, Footsteps reached out to me and introduced me to a man who lived only a few streets away, and his name was Mark Cherney. He's an ophthalmologist, a wonderful man who does a lot in the community. Mark had emailed Footsteps a year after me to simply commend them on their work. And they said, well, there's this chick in Melbourne called Leah Boulton who's wanting to start something in this area. Why don't you connect in? Mark and I had a couple of coffees. I said, Mark, I want to do this. Will you come on this journey with me? You know everyone in Melbourne, in the Jewish community. I don't. I know a lot more people now. But that's how we got this thing started.
So where do you go with it, though? I mean, yes, okay, it started and this idea is born, but on a practical level, what do you do? I mean, I guess one of the first things is, how do you let people know you're doing what you're doing? But more than that, the second part to that would really be, what is it you're offering?
It's taken us a while to work out exactly, to fine-tune what we're offering, but actually it hasn't really changed over the years. My marketing and PR background has completely helped in this regard, because just as I didn't realise that people in the frum communities and frum world may question their lifestyle or their practices or their beliefs, most other Jews in the broader community at that point, back in 2003, 2004, hadn't thought about that either. We didn't have television programs like Unorthodox, Shtisel, all of those. It was actually quite a new thing. We'd heard a lot about leaving the Amish.
True.
That was so hot right now, about 20 years ago.
And the parallels are frighteningly similar.
Frighteningly similar. So what do we do? What Pathways does is we support and empower people who are questioning their lifestyle, their practices or their beliefs from insular Orthodox Jewish communities, no matter where they are on their journey. So we might have people who are living with a foot in both camps.
Yeah.
On the outside, they are living a very full life, but underneath they don't necessarily believe. There's a term for that. It's called orthoprax. So you practice the orthodox way, but you may not believe it. A lot of people do it for shalom bayit, for a peaceful home.
Yeah.
They may be married. The main reason why people choose to stay and not to move away is the impact that their decision will have on the rest of their family. Yeah. So for that young woman that I first met, had she chosen to move away, that would have impacted the marriageability, the shidduchim prospects for all of her younger siblings. And her cousins.
Yeah.
For somebody who has got 10 children and they are questioning them for themselves, if those kids aren't married, may choose to stay. So we often find that people come to Pathways before they're married or at the end once their kids have all been married off.
Okay, so you reference that Pathways support these people. What's the support? What do you, on a practical level, do?
Yes, we run a number of programs. Different people have different needs depending on where their journey is at. Some people need very individually tailored support. We have the Path for Life Mentor program where we train up people from our broader community. About 2 months ago, Naomi Swart and Cassandra Barrett, who's at Jewish Care, trained up 15 mentors. Half of them have lived experience. They left ultra-orthodoxy themselves and orthodoxy themselves. The other half have got practical life skills. They may be specialists in areas of CV writing, career counselling, maths and English tutoring. So some of our pathfinders, the people that come to Pathways, that are finding their path, receive tutoring, academic tutoring.
And I imagine that's a big one.
Yes, it is. It's a growing one because we're getting more and more younger people approaching us who are wanting to get Year 12 qualification, to go to university.
And presumably, no matter what stage of education they've had or that they're at, it's a very different education.
Yes. Often we find that the people that come to us are excellent at studying, have amazing studying skills, brilliant brains.
But it's what they studied.
Exactly, it's the content. So they need support in just everyday maths, English, that kind of thing. Science. And then we've got mentors with lived experience who can help guide, but not pull anyone away from religiosity. So it's really important to note that Pathways does not encourage anyone to move away from their religious lifestyle. As I said, your truth is different from yours, from mine. Everybody's journey is their own. But to have somebody who's been on that path themselves and to see how they navigated that path can really support them. I want to make a point that the young woman who I found inspiration to start this did actually end up remarrying in the ultra-Orthodox community. She's gone on to have children, she's happy. But we went for walks for a couple of years.
Interesting. The grass is not necessarily always greener, I imagine.
That's right. And actually she put me down as one of her references on her CV for a shidduch. So the From communities have a one-pager of what their interests are, what their yichus, what their lineage is, and they have some references on there, and she put me down. So no part of me and no part of Pathways as an organisation is about pulling anyone away.
Is this largely a female demographic of Pathfinders?
We have about 60% women, 40% men.
And I mean, you've said that they come at different stages of their life journey. For some reason in my head, straight away I conjure up marriage breakdown.
Yes.
Or wanting to somehow end the marriage. Is that the case?
Sometimes it happens that marriages can break down if one partner doesn't want to stay from.
Mm.
In some situations, relationships are actually able to navigate through life where you have what they call a frum and fry marriage, and there's mutual respect. Sometimes it happens where actually both partners move away together. One might start, generally one starts that process, and the other one comes along slowly with them, often bringing kids as well.
Interesting, the kids, okay, because I was going to say, do you find, and obviously again it's a generalised question, do you find that it can cause tension within relationships, extended family relationships?
Absolutely. Significantly.
Yeah.
And that's why another part of what we do, and I guess the original reason where I could see a need, was community connection. So we connect people with similar life journeys together. The other aspect of our programming, because I mentioned the Path for Life mentor program. So some people need community connection. They don't need a mentor.
Yeah.
They might have moved away 20 years ago. Or they might still be at the start of their journey, but also want community connection.
Yeah.
Because we have people with 8, 10 siblings and nowhere to go for Rosh Hashanah.
They need a support system.
So we run a cultural, we call it Culture Club, and we run Rosh Hashanah lunch, Pesach lunch, Hanukkah in the park picnic with sufganiyot, with donuts, Lag BaOmer feast. We run meetups around the Jewish festivals, around the Chagim, the Yom Tovim. If somebody wants to turn up and give a little drush, they can.
Yeah.
If someone wants to bring a song along for everyone to sing, they can.
Yeah.
Often we have themes to discuss. So for Rosh Hashanah coming up, we're having a lunch, and the theme is going to be new beginnings.
Mm-hmm.
And people will come and talk about what are the new beginnings for them that year, or what are some new beginnings that they've taken on in their lives.
Mm-hmm.
Often before this big group of high holy days, we'll get together and talk about how are you feeling about these upcoming holidays, navigating them. Either you haven't been invited to family or old friends that you've grown up with, or you have been invited. Pesach's a difficult time for many to be invited, particularly for the women. They find Pesach difficult. It's a festival about freedom, but they watch their mother and sisters in the kitchen till 3 a.m. preparing for the next night. Yeah. So we have a cultural connection program as well.
Mm. Do you find that many of these people, these pathfinders, find their place within their family again, or is there a family breakdown? I mean, it must be really challenging with parents, but also with kids. Can't begin to imagine how you navigate it with multiple children if you want something different.
It's very mixed.
Mm.
It's very mixed, and we do discuss these things a lot with the pathfinders that come to us. We have some people with grown children, so some people that have left, they have grown children. One of those children might be ultra frum, the other one may not.
Yeah.
There are simple things. Do I keep the kosher kitchen? Do I not? Very often the parents try to, because they want to be inclusive of their children, but there are a lot of roads to navigate there. Yes, there are very often family breakdowns. It's not uncommon to hear somebody say, my mum and dad didn't speak to me for 8 years.
Yeah.
But we do find over time, generally, and I like to be optimistic, that relationships can heal to a certain extent or find a mutual place of acceptance. Mm-hmm. It often means that for kids, they need to return to the family home wearing clothes that are acceptable for that home. So girls will go back and women will wear skirts when they go and see their parents, things like that. Things that may seem simple to many of us, but actually for some, it's not simple, because if there are gender and sexuality differences that people, our pathfinders are navigating, to return home to their parents having to wear a skirt might actually be a real challenge for themselves.
And are you seeing more of an increase of people, of pathfinders, with the gender identity issue as their prompting, their leading mindset for coming to you?
We have got a small LGBT community, and they have their own WhatsApp group.
Okay.
So we also have WhatsApp groups.
Yes.
An LGBT WhatsApp group, a women's only WhatsApp group, and a general WhatsApp group.
Okay.
You could be a member of all three.
Yeah.
You could be a woman in the general group,
Yeah.
in the women's group, and in the LGBT group. We find you're asking the question, is gender and sexuality a reason why people choose to move away?
Yeah.
It can be for some, but there are also, it's often linked with other philosophical differences, not liking the strict gender roles within those communities.
Yeah.
So it's usually layered. It's usually, it's rarely one reason why people choose to move away.
So in this incredibly insular community, how are they finding you?
Right.
I mean, you originally, and now I guess Pathways is an organisation.
So
they're not sitting and Googling.
Yeah, they're not sitting and Googling, or many of them. However, since COVID, there's been more access to the internet for people.
Yes.
We're finding, and actually this is a worldwide thing, because the organisations that do what we do, there's us, there's Pathways in New York, there's Hillel, and there are other organisations, Hillel's in Israel, there's in the UK, I've got a couple as well. We all meet, we regularly Zoom, and we've even got a WhatsApp group and we share stuff daily. Yeah. How are they finding us? I guess my PR and marketing background has helped to get the word out there. So pre-COVID, we used to do a lot of public speaking. We'd speak at GIF on panels.
Yes.
For instance, schools would invite us in to speak. We've spoken at schools. We've even spoken at Monash Medical to talk about when children go to Monash Hospital.
Yeah.
How can you better understand as medics?
Yes.
How can you better understand them?
Yeah.
And if you've got an ultra-Orthodox kid sit in ICU and they're on machinery over Shabbat.
Yeah.
Or they're sitting there in a ward with other family or other kids on television. Yeah. How do you better understand that? So we've been speaking all over the place.
Yes.
That gets out to people like you,
yes,
who then might have a Shabbat lunch, and you tell somebody, who then tells somebody else, and then eventually it gets into the frum communities.
Doing what we do best in the Jewish community.
But we've had articles in the Jewish News, in the Herald Sun, we've had blogs on we've had podcasts on the ABC.
Which all of those things are amazing at getting the word out, but not necessarily infiltrating a really tight-knit ultra-Orthodox community that don't necessarily look at those channels.
That's right. But once 1, 2, 3, 4 within those communities come to us, it's amazing how the word spreads. And we are now, in 2022, starting to get people from deeper within the communities.
Which really is your impact indicator.
That's it.
So I know you said Pathways is non-political in the sense that you're not pushing people to leave the community. But I imagine there are some traditionalists, for want of a better word, within the ultra-Orthodox community who don't necessarily like what you're doing.
I'm sure there are.
Yeah.
It's interesting, with the Adus community and the women that I've met within that community, and it is generally women, very often they will say, and this is from early years as well, Kol HaKavod, it's an honour to you in the work that your organisation is doing. Yeah. Wow. We hate that people leave, but we love that they've got a group that will keep them feeling connected to Yiddishkeit, to their Jewish sense of connection. And often they have used the word special. The work that Pathways is doing is very special. I've heard that word used a lot. I think Chabad struggle with what we do a little bit more, and I understand why. I'm not saying that they don't like what we do by any means, but Chabad very much wants to keep bringing people back in. Yeah. With Kiruv. It's the way that they like to, it's the way that they work.
Yes.
So I once received an email from a prominent member of the Chabad community that said, "It's an honour to you, kol hakavod, to what you're doing within this Jewish community, but I feel that your energies are misspent. If only these people were to believe in Hashem, they wouldn't have these problems." And I guess I understand from their perspective why they feel that way.
Yeah.
But there are people that are never going to believe that way, and they just still need a safe space to go, ask questions, feel connected, feel safe, and that's what we offer.
And I think from what you've said, they're the main things: connection and safe. You know, they're the two key words that nobody can challenge what you're offering in terms of those two things.
Yes, that's right.
Do you think that people like Julia Hart or, you know, are giving this community a bad name? Or do you think they're building up the work that Pathways is doing?
Well, if you ask Julia Hart, she would say that she is the face of people who are leaving Orthodox and ultra-Orthodox communities.
Yeah.
I've heard her say that. If you ask the people that run these organisations, Julia Hart has done very well for herself, but she does not represent the people that we represent, that we help and advocate for.
Yes, and I wonder how many really identify with her.
No, and she's actually, no, they don't, actually. The Rags to Riches story is a brilliant one for television.
Yeah.
It's a brilliant one for a book.
Yeah.
It's not the norm by any means.
Yeah, understandable. So tying it all together in terms of what you've experienced through your journey in Pathways, going back to your upbringing in a non-religious environment, how does it leave you feeling about your own personal sense of Judaism?
Oh, well, it's incredible. This journey for me has connected me in with Jewish community in a way that I never wished, never envisaged, but am so grateful for and feel so much richer for. Somehow this has become my life purpose, which I would never, ever in a million years have thought. Growing up in a family where both my parents consider themselves atheists. Neither of them are from Melbourne. My dad's a New Zealander, my mum was from Sydney. I grew up in Mulgrave. We were pretty much the only Jews in the village.
Yeah.
Then we moved to Camberwell, one of the first families to move there. My parents have never been members of a congregation. And I've had to think about why is it that this community of people who are questioning the close community that they were raised in, very cloistered community that they were raised in, very supportive in many ways community, but can be so unsupportive in other.
Yeah.
We have Dusty Ehrlich on our board.
Yes.
And unfortunately Dusty has had a very unsupportive experience. How have I ended up with this as my purpose? And I think from my life growing up at Mount Scopus College, I never felt like one of them. I always felt different. We didn't have the house in Surfers Paradise, or we didn't have the broad group of family friends.
Yes.
We didn't go to shul. I always felt like a little bit of a misfit. Even though I had brilliant friends, and still to this day, the majority of my closest friends, if my house is burning down, they'd be there, and I'd be there for them. But it just didn't culturally feel right for me. We would go out for dinner to the local Chinese place on a Friday night.
Yeah.
Somehow I feel, I guess that has helped me to relate to those who grew up in a community where they didn't fit in.
Yeah.
And they're trying to find their purpose or lead a life of self-determination, which I believe we all have a right to, I was given every opportunity in this world of education, of sport, of art, of theatre, music. And I guess I wish that for others if they haven't had that opportunity. So, yeah, look, it's really enriched my sense of Jewish identity.
Yeah.
My daughters.
I was just going to ask you about from a parenting perspective and her identity.
My daughter goes to King David School. She always has. But she has a really brilliant understanding now of all the different facets of our Jewish.
More so than most.
Really does.
Yeah.
And actually, when we refer to I think earlier we were talking about the ultra-Orthodox community, there are actually many. And they don't necessarily know each other.
Yeah.
They're actually very isolated communities, so that's important to know as well.
Yeah.
So someone might move away from Hadass and decide to become a Chabad, become Chabad. Someone might move from Chabad and become move to Mizrahi.
And they're massive jumps within themselves.
Huge.
Yeah. Yeah.
Huge.
Well, we tend to lump them all into one pot, and they're very, very different and very different and quite isolated from each other.
That's it. Yeah. But live, meters from each other.
Yeah. So is this now your full-time journey? In your full-time?
It's my full-time role now.
Yeah.
Well, I'm actually only part-time.
Yeah.
I'm paid 3 days a week, but I do a heck of a lot more. We have two wonderful part-time staff. We've got Ravit Tidar, who's our head of operations. She's 13 hours a week, and Jackie Dubs is marketing 10 hours a week, constantly trying to raise funds so that we can broaden our resources, because I'm also managing all the programs.
So that was going to be my last question on that, was the funding. How are you funding? You're now being paid.
Yes.
You've come a long way, I imagine, from a volunteer startup. How are you getting that funding?
So we've got wonderful support from major donors like Gandel, Erdi, Spotlight Foundation, Beeson Foundation. We receive funding from local council for certain programs that we run. We have some great private donors that really believe in what we do and are on this journey with us and for the long term. And the Benelong Foundation have been brilliant. They've supported our the launch of our Path for Life mentor program this year. Community Bank Caulfield Park, they're a huge supporter of what we do in the area of disadvantage and education. But we're always looking, so if anyone wants to come and talk to me, I'm always up for a chat.
Good.
Good. Yeah, and we run different events. We're running a night at GIF.
So get the word out there.
We do,
Well, thank you so much for your time. It's amazing, to hear the journey, and as you say, to draw the parallels and the inspiration from your growing up and your family environment to how you're now using those skills and that background to help other people and make their lives better. It's commendable and it's so admirable. So good luck on your continued journey, and I hope that Pathways continues to grow from strength to strength.
Thank you, Amanda. Thank you, Amanda. And I just want to say thank you to Social Blueprint for taking the time to go and hear what us smaller organisations are doing for the community, because there are so many of us. I remember when I first went and spoke with Jewish Care about this organisation that we were starting, and they said, there are so many that start each week. And I said, well, this one's going to last.
True.
But thank you for promoting all of what we do and having a central platform that gives word to what different events are on, how you can get involved. There's actually something for everyone in this wonderfully colourful and diverse community.
Yeah, and I think that's the one thing that your journey highlights is we are a diverse and intricate community, and there's lots of branches, but there's some amazing work being done.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Amanda.
Thank you.